We are back with more college football coverage. Now, yes, I do recognize I didn't do the Chiefs and Chargers recap like I would have initially wanted to, but that's still on the way. Of course, it would have been much easier though to tackle this first, so that's how I'm going to approach it. And it was still a crazy week of college football, although the quality of some of the games didn't even really compare to the first week, which makes sense. A lot of teams just chose like tune-up games to get their offenses and overall teams in order leading up into, I guess, conference play or stronger competition in the weeks to follow. So you saw a lot of just blowouts from some pretty strong teams. Obviously, Florida State's still rolling. Alabama got right back on track in a tune-up game against Louisiana Monroe. And you also had a few teams playing HBCU opponents and just blowing them completely out of the water. You also had a fair balance of upsets and teams on upset alert. Yeah, I'm looking at fucking Lindenwood against Appalachian State, keeping that game competitive. And then I'm looking at Eastern Michigan somehow losing to Long Island. It was a crazy fucking week. But nevertheless, although I did consume a good amount of college football, the two games that I wanted to focus on the most occurred in the nightcap portion, or at least the 7:30 p.m. slot of Saturday night, and we would start out with Oklahoma versus Michigan. Now, yes, as much as I talk shit about Michigan, I was very hesitant in talking about this game. I'm not going to lie to you, but at the same time, as we're leading up to it, I'm like, okay, I can't not talk about the game because, in all honesty, it shaped up to be a really good one, and there's also some high historical significance here. These two colleges have rarely played each other in college football, to the point where their last matchup against each other took place in 1976, damn near 50 years ago. So I'm like, okay, that alone, like, this is something that rarely happens in a lifetime. I've got to address it then. Like, there's no reason for me to not. And not to mention as well, it's a matchup of intrigue as well. Both of these teams are incredibly strong. Defensively, they have great quarterback prospects. Obviously, the main matchup is focusing on the top recruit in the nation in true freshman quarterback Bryce Underwood for Michigan, and the number one transfer player in this cycle at least, John Mateer for Oklahoma. And I mean, both of these guys have had solid debuts for their squads in the prior week. Obviously, Underwood had a solid true freshman debut against New Mexico, and Mateer kind of put together a Heisman caliber performance in his game against Illinois State, but the strengths that both of these teams possess made it very clear on paper and when we got into the game that this wasn't going to be anything like these two teams facing off against the damn Redbirds or the Lobos. You're going to have to go up front, meet them at the summit, and do as best as you could throughout the course of a game to impose your will against the other team. It was the only way that this game would be won by one team or the other. Even though it was very clear that this game would come down to the trenches, in all honesty, Oklahoma came out guns blazing damn near instantly. I mean, they were able to get Kanak, their tight end, and I'm pretty sure as well that he has a brother who is either still actively on the team or played for them last season. But nevertheless, he would break open for a 31-yard gain to get them into Michigan territory almost immediately. And then from there, with a few runs trickled in there from John Mateer and also Jaden Ott, another pretty solid piece for them, it was the Deion Burks show. Obviously, Deion Burks is a player that actually transferred from Michigan, so it made sense for them to try to get him going early and often in this game, because he was definitely wanting a little bit of revenge, and he would get a solid 21-yard gain early in the drive before getting a 9-yard touchdown catch on a pretty slick route to get Oklahoma on the board and allow them to strike first. Now, it's tough because you're asking Bryce Underwood in this situation, in his second ever start, to face off against a stout Oklahoma defense led by Brent Venables, of course, who is calling defensive plays once again and has always been renowned as a great defensive coordinator. Obviously, he's the head coach of the team. It was always going to be a tough task for him to succeed, and if they wanted to, it's going to be very reliant on, again, doing what they always would like to do. You know this about Michigan at this point, if you've even watched them play. They're going to try to run the ball down your throat. And when they're on, there's nothing you can do about it. But if you can prevent them from drawing first contact in that scenario, you give yourself a pretty good shot throughout the game. And honestly, that's what Oklahoma would do. Outside of a 19-yard catch from one of their receivers, the Oklahoma defense would not truly let up any big plays in the rushing game for quite some time. Like Justice Haynes, in this first half overall, and even when you take these first few drives into account, he was just completely stalled in the backfield. He couldn't do anything. He wasn't even remotely efficient. And they were expecting a little more out of him, seeing as he transferred from Alabama to take a lead role in this system. But it was not fruitful at all. It wasn't all just dull for the Michigan offense, because again, there were big plays every now and then where Bryce Underwood would actually have time in the pocket, and from there he could settle in. Is in a drive following an Oklahoma punt, he actually got a 38-yard dime over to McCulley for a first down in Oklahoma territory. But I mean, still, Oklahoma defenders were just flying all over the field, ensuring that Bryce Underwood was always feeling some kind of pressure, and that outside of the occasional chunk play, they weren't doing anything too crazy to give themselves a scoring opportunity. At that point, with the way the Oklahoma defense was playing, all Oklahoma needed to do on offense was maybe put up another touchdown. And if they could do that, that would create an unattainable distance for the Wolverines to catch back up from. Now, it looked on this drive to start things out like Mateer was going to settle even further into the game. He opened it up with a pretty routine pass, and he got 18 yards out of that, getting them near the 40-yard line. And then all of a sudden, he overshoots one of his wide receivers in the wildest play. And honestly, with the way the night went for him, was probably his worst play. Slightly overshot him, and from there, the Michigan defense was able to pounce on it. They got an interception, and all of a sudden, you're thinking that the Wolverines do have a shot to respond. Which, again, credit to the Oklahoma defense. But they just continued to swarm all running backs, clog up all rushing lanes, and ensure that Bryce Underwood felt the pressure on every critical down. And when you look at his numbers against the blitz by the end of the game, you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. But as far as this drive goes, he would succumb to it, and as a result, the score would remain stagnant for a while. I mean, the Michigan defense was kind of on the same thing. Mateer would be able to get the occasional run out of a scramble because he's just that great of a dual threat. In fact, they showed a graphic that stated he accounted for like the most missed tackles amongst quarterbacks either last season or since last season. And that's fucking scary for any defense. As physical as Michigan can be as a defensive unit, the second they let Mateer get out in space, it was going to be a wrap for them. But they would manage to get a stop, get the ball back, and actually put together a solid drive that took off 6 minutes from the clock. But, even though McCulley was able to get open on a few plays, it felt like there was a little bit of miscommunication between him and Bryce Underwood on multiple occasions, including this crucial third down right here. Like, he was completely locked up. And yet, for whatever reason, Bryce Underwood decided to launch it, and I guess he wasn't even ready for the pass at all. But you're thinking, though, that they could at least get on the board with a field goal here. No. Because for as good as this kicker had been for Michigan last season, especially after transferring, he missed a 32-yard field goal. And that just gave Oklahoma all the ammo they needed to put together a nice 2-minute drill of their own. They would take essentially the rest of the time out of the half responding with a touchdown to put themselves up 14-0. Mateer was just improvising all over the place. Even though the Michigan defense is trying their best to get pressure on them, it wasn't enough. And you would also have their running backs like Barnes emerge for big gains as well. But of course, the drive was going to end with the ball in John Mateer's hands, and that's exactly what would happen. He just barreled his way in the end zone for a touchdown. And all of a sudden, the Sooners were in prime position to win the game. We were at halftime, and the stat line or a graphic thrown out before the game stated that in his entire career, Brent Venables had been 21-5 against true freshman quarterbacks. And again, that honestly makes a lot of sense, because if you can game plan that well against that kind of talent, knowing that the skills are there, but the overall football IQ might not match up to that of a more experienced player, of course you're going to be able to exploit that in Brent Venables' shoes. And it was looking like they were on pace to do the same thing. All they needed to do is maintain control in the second half, and they very nearly lost all momentum within an instant. For as good as they had been doing against Justice Haynes all game long, he only had like 36 rushing yards to that point, and on very low efficiency, I might add. But he opened up the third quarter banging his head on the fucking goalpost for a 75-yard touchdown. Just like that. It was incredibly insane to watch, and that took damn near all the energy out of Gaylord Memorial Stadium. Like, it was just fucking wild, dude. They didn't waste any time getting back a touchdown of their own. And their defense was, for a while, keeping them in the game, which is something you have to give them credit for. Also, if you're Oklahoma in this situation, it has to be understood that, like, you do not let a team like Michigan linger around in a ball game, because all it can take is a play like that happening, and it just completely turns the game around. But they would manage to stop Bryce Underwood once more, getting him into a deep third down after tackling Justice Haynes for a loss. And then, again, for whatever reason, they thought a screenplay would work here. They immediately swarmed it, and they got their offense the ball back. They made pretty light work of it. This man, John Mateer, is a fucking magician, though. Like, they were on a third and long play, and this man, John Mateer, rolls out to his fucking right, hits Isaiah Satania from absolutely deep with a just beautiful breadbasket throw. He initially got down inside like the 10-yard line, but they had to review the play, and they realized that as he was running, he accidentally stepped out at like the 13-yard line. But nonetheless, it was a key conversion for the Sooners. They kept it pushing, because within just a few plays, John Mateer will once again get himself an open rushing lane to exploit, and he would bounce it outside for another 10-yard rushing touchdown of his to give them a 21-7 lead. The Wolverines would get a little bit of fortune. Like, Bryce Underwood and that entire offense was still in a very similar situation. But Isaiah Satania, for as good as he had been most of the night, he would muff the catch, or at least get in the way of the catch with the ball bouncing off him. And the Wolverines were able to recover it, get themselves easy field position, but it still wasn't enough. because I really just don't know how exactly to explain this one right here. I'm not gonna lie. Like, you would have him try to go for Donovan McCulley again, and I suppose that McCulley was supposed to run a sort of post route. So as he's cutting towards the inside, in the middle of the field, for whatever reason, Bryce Underwood throws it all the way to the left, like he's supposed to run a fade. And I was just really perplexed about that one. I don't really know what exactly I was supposed to get out of that play right there. It just looked incredibly weird. And that's how you know that the defense that Oklahoma was implementing was working. If you can have Bryce Underwood making that kind of error in that moment. And this was happening on a 3rd and 6 on an ensuing drive. They would eventually get a field goal on the board, though, yet again. And, I mean, the game wasn't fully over. Fourth quarter, yeah, you're down by 8 points to open things up, but you ain't out of the fight. And it would remain that way as Oklahoma would put together a solid enough drive with John Mateer continuing to do what he does. And all of these other Oklahoma players finding pockets to contribute in. But still, they would be stopped on 3rd down in Michigan territory, and they would miss a 42-yard field goal. This is the drive that really might have changed things up for Michigan, I guess, in terms of their fortunes in this game. Because to get decent progress on a 1st down and then have that overturned with a sack and then back-to-back incomplete passes, giving Oklahoma enough time to put together another solid drive, it ended up eating them alive. Because for the next 8 minutes and 27 seconds across 16 plays, Oklahoma would hold on to their possession tightly. At every turn, every time they needed to pick up a conversion, somehow, some way, they got it. They got whatever they needed, and they were just controlling the line of scrimmage. And this is where you can really say that the trenches just took completely over. Anytime you can control the time of possession like that in a late game situation and have the team literally on the ropes, you know you're doing something right. By the time that Oklahoma would get this field goal right here, it was a 24-13 ball game, and there were only 1 minute and 48 seconds left. Michigan is not an offense that is going to thrive on the explosive play. Now, of course, they're not devoid of getting them. They'll get theirs, especially in the rushing attack, and they had big plays in the passing game in the game. But you're asking an offense who is intentionally trying to control the line of scrimmage and impose their will in the rushing attack. You're asking them to drive down in 1 minute and 48 seconds, less than that even, and put up a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, get an onside kick, and get in good enough range to trust their kicker to make a field goal. It was too much. And they would turn the ball over on downs here. All the Oklahoma Sooners would have to do from there is take a victory formation, and they would secure the 24-13 win. Great stuff for the Sooners. And it was definitely a rough game for Michigan, and especially for Bryce Underwood and the entire rushing attack. But I want to focus on Oklahoma first. I mean, John Mateer, man. 3 total touchdowns for him, 2 on the ground, 74 yards rushing, and he also had 270 yards through the air and a touchdown pass on 61.8% completion. Now, the broadcast team made a great point when trying to talk about the sustainability of an SEC quarterback rushing for that many times in a game. I didn't really disagree with that statement. You know, in an optimal scenario, sure, you'll have Mateer go out on broken down plays and scramble, but to run him 19 times on the ground, knowing that he is your best consensus player right now and that you'd like to have him for the entire season, that could be a risk in the long term, especially against the conference opponent. But, that ended up being okay for them here. And plus, again, although some of the running backs were okay at best, it wasn't sustainable enough. I mean, in terms of true running backs, between Blaylock, Barnes, and Ott, all those guys combined for something like 19 carries and 57 yards. So it had to be Mateer opening the rest of the offense up, and that ended up paying off tremendously for them. Deion Burks also had 7 receptions for 101 yards and a touchdown, while Kanak had 5 receptions for 69. As for Michigan, though, yeah, when you look at their rushing attack, even though it comes out to them having a little bit of advantage in yards and a better advantage in terms of yards per carry, that 75-yard run was literally the biggest play from scrimmage in the game, and it was an anomaly, if nothing else, compared to everything else that their rushers had been doing. Like 31 rushes outside of that combined for just 71 yards and no touchdowns. And by that point, they already lost the war. But it doesn't help as well, because if you're not going to impose that kind of threat in the rushing attack, they're going to try as hard as they can to ensure that Bryce Underwood doesn't have an opportunity to beat you with his arm. Now, he made some sound plays. Like, there was one play where he distracted the Oklahoma defense trying to run with his legs, and it opened up the pass. Very smart from a true freshman. But outside of moments like that here and there, it wasn't consistent enough. He went just 9 of 24 passing and 142 yards he threw for as well. 37.5% completion is staggeringly low. And that is weighed down by one key metric: his numbers against the blitz, because we have to introduce them here. Now, John Mateer, granted, he has a little more experience, so obviously he's going to do better. He had, 13 completions, very efficient in that regard, over 130 yards passing in those scenarios, and also had a touchdown pass. As for Bryce Underwood, he had multiple attempts going up against the blitz. At a point, he was 9, he might have crossed 10, and he didn't complete a single pass throughout the entire game against the blitz. Now, again, you're not going to be able to diagnose it that well as a true freshman quarterback. But at the same time, and if you get even one completion in that scenario, that could scare off, in theory, the Oklahoma defense from doing what they did. Or maybe not as well, because again, Venables would then improve to 22-5 in his career against true freshman quarterbacks. There's a good chance he might have still stuck with that game plan of just testing Bryce Underwood's mettle. But who's really to say? I mean, it's not all too dissimilar from how the Longhorns did Alex Orji and the Michigan squad last year. But this feels a little bit more understandable to me. They've just got some struts to take throughout this season, and it is going to be a learning process for Bryce Underwood. He can be a good player. This certainly is not his finest moment in time, but that's more than okay if you're in his shoes. Like, I wouldn't make too big of a deal about that, to be honest with you. Alright. And then from that one, over to a pretty interesting one against Mississippi State and Arizona State. This one was just incredibly wild. Like, I just watched the entire thing through, and it was just a fucking doozy, man. Like, the Bulldogs would start out the game in pretty much the same way they did against Southern Miss last week. You know, they got a solid run to go, and then they hit Anthony Evans III up multiple times, including on an in-breaking like post route or so for a 48-yard touchdown to start the scoring in this game. Let's just put it like this. For a while, this game was controlled completely, and I mean completely, by Mississippi State. You know, for as good as Jordan Tyson is for the Sun Devils at the same time, it felt like no other player served as enough of a threat. Now, by the end of the game, the running backs on this squad, the dew-headed monster that they had, actually put together a pretty good game. But it took a while for those guys to get going. And it felt like they just had to keep on trying to get Jordan Tyson to bail him out, and it wasn't working because the Bulldogs defense, they saw it coming from a mile away. They were just laser tight on him for most of this game. You know, there were rarely moments that he was able to break free. He's still a good enough wide receiver, so I mean, he was able to get his every now and then. But when you're consistently trying to settle for giving the ball to him and rarely involving anybody else, there's another receiver in Mattia, for example, that I don't even think got a target throughout the rest of this game, and he was actually one of their better returning players. So it's like, what the, like, that just makes it all the more easier on Mississippi State. Now, of course, the defense for the Sun Devils was able to get a few stops every now and then. Like, this fourth down stop was pretty good, for example, because Shapen had already tried to run the ball on a down before, and so I guess they scheme up a play where they have just drag routes all over the place. It gets extremely congested, too. Something almost breaks open, but not for long enough because all the cornerbacks are holding up their assignments pretty well. So Shapen tries to step up and climb the pocket, tries to dive for a first down, but they stop him just short of it and get the ball back. That still wouldn't end up mattering because the Sun Devils would just continue to get themselves in punting situations. And eventually the Bulldogs would be able to get back on the board again after getting Fluff Bothwell and Anthony Evans III involved yet again to get a 10-0 lead on them by the end of the first quarter. I mean, the Sun Devils just have to thank goodness that their defense didn't always break, because the way that they were playing throughout this entire first half, like, the pressure was on. I mean, they were just making Sam Levitt truly look like a freshman quarterback, even though he now has a little more experience under his belt. Like, they got to a damn 4th and 36 on this drive. And the fact that they were backed all the way up like that, it led to a pretty easy drive for the Bulldogs here. Because all it took was 2 plays. And Shapen failed to hit Traha, but he would get a damn great completion to the Oklahoma transfer in Brennan Thompson for yet another touchdown catch. He had been putting together a pretty good game in this one, and that would just add to it. Then, to make matters even worse for Arizona State, this was quite an unexplainable pass from Sam Levitt, but he would get picked off by the Bulldogs defense, giving them yet another opportunity to make something out of their possession here. And then, even though that failed, Sun Devils would turn it over on downs. And they got yet another chance at it. But the defense, through it all, continued to stand their ground, continued to make sure that Arizona State had at least a fighting chance to get themselves back into things. And although it took a lot of fucking work, after a Jordan Tyson catch and a few other plays that resulted in incomplete passes, it would take a 51-yard field goal for Arizona State to finally get on the board. But I'll tell you what, it's better than nothing at all. And things are starting to trend in Arizona State's direction. I mean, this entire drive to open up the half would just see them completely abandon the pass. And I understand, Sam Levitt wasn't doing his best at that moment in terms of throwing the ball. But between him, Brown, and Udo running the hell out of the football, they were able to grind a decent amount of time off the clock, and they were just able to churn and burn down the field for a touchdown for Udo here to get them within 7. All of a sudden, this was a game again. And it helped that both defenses were just getting down and dirty, stopping each other at will through all the different schemes that both teams were trying to implement. It didn't end up mattering. They weren't fazed by it. They just continued to grind it out. And, I mean, this entire fourth quarter was the epitome of a grinded out moment. I mean, to open things up, you would have the Sun Devils cap off a 5-minute and 19-second drive with, again, a few more contributions from Jordan Tyson and also just damn strong running from that running back duo in Brown and Udo, who would finish the game with over 100 yards each. So that's definitely something that Arizona State should be looking forward to. But it would be Jordan Tyson who would get him in the end zone to tie up a ball game. And then, in an optimal scenario for the Sun Devils, they got to stop. They got to stop. With 10 minutes and 41 seconds left to go, you get the ball back. Now, here is where the really intriguing situation comes in. And yes, this might be a little bit of recency bias, but at the same time, the way that this drive was going, something tells me that if they would have chosen a different alternative here, this game could have resulted in a very different end. I mean, this entire drive would see them call 17 plays across 8 minutes and 54 seconds and get all the way from their own 4-yard line over to the Mississippi State 1-yard line. They had just one pass on the drive, and that was to pick up a first down by none other than Jordan Tyson. But they were just completely grinding their way down the field. And I felt like, because on this 3rd and 1 here, 3rd and goal technically, Udo was stopped for no gain. And they would be caught in having to make a really big decision in this game. Do they go for it and effectively give themselves an outright lead right there? Or do they just settle for the field goal? Because honestly, the fact that they were down by 17 in the first place and worked their way back up to get this damn lead, maybe they were just content with taking their points. And I guess after some long, hard thinking about it, they decided to take their points. Now, again, did that decision inherently lead to what would happen next? No. But the fact that this shit would take place on the next drive just makes it hurt for all the Arizona State fans out there. I mean, they were seemingly getting a chance to make some decent stops. You know, they were forcing Mississippi State to keep everything in front of their defenders. They weren't even allowing them to get out of bounds like that. And Tom was ticking off. As long as Arizona State stepped sticking to that, man, this game was going to be over. But one just extremely brutal decision by their defensive coverage would lead to a great ending for the Bulldogs here. On this 3rd and long play, you have Shapen once again trying to drop back to pass, okay? And you have a sort of, I guess, flat assignment and a deep assignment with both of the cornerbacks or so on that side. Now 5, because they're running doubles, I guess he was initially accounting for Brennan Thompson on the play, but as Brennan Thompson makes the cut, he switches to account for the flat route. The problem with that was that number 12 was so far out of position from where he needed to be. And granted, I think he's a returning player for them, one of their better cover corners on the team. He's so far out of position of the play that as soon as Brennan Thompson makes this sort of cut on this in-breaking, I think it might have been a dig route. Could have been a deep post route as well, in all honesty. Shapen had enough time to fire it right over to Thompson. And with a bad angle of pursuit, Thompson was able to just coast his way into the end zone for a touchdown to not only end the game, but end the game in damn near the exact same fashion that the fucking game started in. Which is just pretty crazy to look at in retrospect. And it wouldn't help that Sam Levitt would again be intercepted by the Bulldogs defense to add even more salt to the wound. So yeah, in one of the wilder games of that night, the Bulldogs would extend their consecutive wins to open up this season to 2 and have an undefeated record going into week 3, which is not something I truly anticipated. But that is par for the course in college football. Now, their rushing attack, as much as I was saying that would need to be on point in order for them to succeed, they honestly didn't need it this game. I mean, they averaged just 2.5 yards a carry, for crying out loud. But their 2 wide receivers and Anthony Evans III with 9 receptions and 108 yards and a touchdown, and Brennan Thompson with 6 receptions for 133 yards and 2 touchdowns were more than enough for them on this night. As for Arizona State, man, I think that they released official AP poll rankings like yesterday, and they ended up dropping to an unranked status after this loss. That's gotta hurt, but it does make sense when you think about it. I mean, the fact that you have a defensive lapse like that late in a ball game is never a good sign, especially if you are a team that is trying to contend for a CFP. Because honestly, if that's a better team doing that to you, the noise would be even louder in that scenario. I'm not going to lie to you. But it's already incredibly loud because, again, Mississippi State coming off that horrible season last year, you ain't expecting them to do anything like this. Yet they just come out and get themselves a game-winning play like that. But Sam Levitt struggled the entire night. I mean, yes, he had 25 rushing yards on the ground, but he only completed 45.5% of his passes and had a touchdown and 2 picks with just 82 passing yards. Like, give credit to that Mississippi State defense. They were flying all over the field, and they were ensuring that no other receivers got involved. The fact that Jordan Tyson had 68 of those 82 receiving yards, and only 3 players caught passes from Sam Levitt on the night. That tells you everything you need to know, even with them having a vast advantage in rushing. Like I mentioned, Brown had 110 rushing yards on 18 carries, and Udo had 105 yards on 23 carries and a touchdown. Completely ran all over this Mississippi State defense. They had no answer for it. So again, from that perspective, you're thinking maybe, yeah, Udo might have just gotten stopped for no gain, but at the same time, you'd been averaging 4.9 yards per carry all night long. I'm sure you could have trusted at least one of those guys, at least one of them, to punch it in from that yard out and not even allow yourself to suffer that kind of heartbreak. But again, it's easy to play that game in post. Obviously, Dillingham might have had other thoughts in his mind in the moment that this happened. And they just got to live with that. Now, can they bounce back from this? I don't know if they'll get back into a high ranking. It's going to take a lot of work to do it. They're going to have to get other quality wins elsewhere. But the season's not completely over for Arizona State. Especially when we realize that the CFP is as big as it is. They just have to keep stringing together wins, and they need to make sure that their defense plays much better down the stretch of ball games than that. Like, they have been hanging in there for all that time and hadn't given up a single touchdown or point in multiple drives to open up the second half and end off the second quarter, and yet that is the time you decide to fuck something up. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the NFL recap, whatever that may be. Peace.